The purpose of this hearing is to discuss the future trajectory of Turkey between the West and the East, as well as Turkey's relationship with the United States, Europe, neighboring countries, and adversaries such as Russia. I would like to start with a moment of silence for the passing of Representative Sylvester Turner of Texas. Let's take a moment of silence. Thank you. And I would also like to welcome when they arrive. I'll announce now we have Representatives Lawler, Sherfulis McCormick, Zinke, Issa, and Schneider who will be joining us today. They're all members of the full committee, so there's no reason to vote them on. They'll be joining us. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I welcome everyone to the first Europe Subcommittee hearing. It is an honor to chair this subcommittee that deals with the dynamic and potentially dangerous environment in a crucial region for U.S. national interests. I look forward to our work as a subcommittee. Today, our objective is to examine Turkey's roles in NATO and necessarily the Middle East, even though this is the Europe Subcommittee. It will be necessary to look at Turkey's track record in NATO and the Middle East in order to gain perspective on their role going forward in both regions. As a NATO member, historically, Turkey has operated as an ally as a member of the NATO alliance, often aligning their foreign policy interests with the goals of NATO. But in the last decade, there have been some actions that don't line up with the NATO goals. Take, for example, the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the barbaric October 7th attacks on Israel in 2023. While Turkey supports most of the agenda within the NATO alliance, it did operate as a lone member, NATO lone member, refusing to condemn the actions of nefarious players in the Middle East. The world is changing quickly, and Turkey's geographic location places it at the epicenter of the most tumultuous regions as conflicts rage in Europe and the Middle East. Turkey has also assumed the position of power broker in the vacuum created by Syria's regime change and is vexed by their unresolved issues with the Kurds going forward. The world, particularly the United States, is watching closely as Turkey decides whether or not to ease tensions with the Kurds. America has relied on the Kurds' partnership in the region, and opposition to their success will be a major sticking point in Turkey's relationship with the United States. Turkey is also unique in that geographically it straddles both Europe and Asia. It is a prominent member of the Minerals Security Partnership and could be a strategic partner for the West by operating as an alternative to Beijing. Recently, Turkey laid claim to one of the largest rare earth element reserves in the world, with a rare earth 694 million ton deposit. Historically, Turkey was the anchor for NATO's southeast corner against the old Soviet Union. But over the past decade, Turkey's commitment to anchoring that region has begun to crack. They have the second largest military in NATO, only behind the United States, which makes Turkey a key asset to the alliance, but their geographic location also makes them vulnerable to bad actors in the region. I look forward to hearing testimony from our three experts today as they share their views on Turkey's role in both Europe and the Middle East. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, for any statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share your thoughts at this time with the Turner family. I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank our witnesses here today. For years, Turkey has been balancing its relationship with Europe and the Middle East. Most recently, following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, Turkey has been vital in enabling the shipment of grain through the Black Sea and standing up for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. These are principled stances, and Turkey should be applauded for those decisions. Yet, significant challenges remain with Turkey, including Turkish support for Hamas, a brutal terrorist organization which conducted the heinous attack on October 7th. This support must end. At the same time, Turkey's acquisition of Russian S-400 air defense systems, as well as its delays in approving Finland and Sweden for NATO membership, certainly complicated our bilateral relationship. I also believe firmly that Turkey must use its leverage with Azerbaijan and push for a durable, long-term peace in the Caucasus. In our bilateral relationships with Turkey, we have a mixed history, but when assessing the U.S.-Turkey relationship, it's important to acknowledge that it is a relationship. Both sides must contribute and work for the benefit of our relations and our safety worldwide. I can't sit here this morning and ignore the deeply concerning events on the U.S. side of this relationship, which undermines our influence regionally, but more importantly, with our transatlantic and global allies. Simply put, we must take a look in the mirror, and in our own relationship with Turkey, there are a variety of issues which warrant this view and observation of U.S. policy. First, on the important issue of NATO. Since 1949, NATO has been the bedrock of the U.S.-Turkey relationship. As I've said, Turkey's delay in admitting Finland and Sweden into NATO following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine complicated this relationship, yet I can't sit here without stating the obvious. President Trump's go-it-alone strategy does not further our relationship with NATO, does not help us work on important issues like counterterrorism in Turkey. It does not help pressure allies, many of whom have shed blood on our behalf following 9/11, of our appreciation of our commitment to NATO. On the issue of Russia, I'm deeply concerned with Turkish involvement and unwillingness to cut trade with the Kremlin and cease the export of important dual-use items to Russia, which Putin needs for his war effort. Yet, we must look in the mirror. President Trump has sided with Russia. He has praised Putin's authoritarian leadership style, and he's been unwilling to call Putin the aggressor. And importantly, on Ukraine, Turkey is a critical ally and has helped facilitate the Black Sea Grain Initiative and enforce the Montreux Convention in the Black Sea. Turkey can and should do even more, but so must the United States. The Trump administration has repeatedly shut the door on Ukraine. Rather than bolster Ukraine with military support to combat Russian aggression, this administration has frozen all U.S. assistance to Ukraine, halted intelligence assistance in Ukraine, and paused offensive cyber operations against Russia here at home. Rather than make clear at the United Nations that Russia is an aggressor state and that Vladimir Putin, a war criminal, is to blame for this war, this administration sided with Belarus and North Korea in opposition. Rather than work with President Zelensky to secure a lasting, secure peace agreement, the President and Vice President berated him in the Oval Office, echoing Putin's talking points and lecturing Zelensky about democracy, while the President and the Vice President make a mockery of that with that performance here at home. At this time, with so much on the line, we must speak up for our values, for our allies in Ukraine, for the people in this country, what they believe, that appeasing dictators and attacking our allies who have died with so many Americans in our history dating back to this great 80-year-plus period since World War II, doing that is simply wrong. I'll close with this. My uncle died on French soil during World War II. As a member of Congress, I've had the opportunity to meet with dozens of Gold Star families like my own who suffered loss at the hands of enemies. Today, I can't help but think of the Ukrainian families, hundreds of thousands of them, who, while looking to the United States for partnership, are instead receiving an empty hand, a closed fist, and thankless public rebukes designed to the benefit of Vladimir Putin. While our president abandons Ukraine, many in Congress won't. And I urge all of my colleagues to stay with Ukraine, to stand up for what we all know is right, to stand up for Ukraine. And I look forward to our witnesses' testimony here today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. We have Dr. Anna Borschevskaya, the Herald Grinspoon Senior Fellow for the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. We have Dr. Jonathan Schanzer, the Executive Director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And we have the Honorable Celeste Wallander, Adjunct Senior Fellow, Center for New American Security. This committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us and is grateful to have you here to speak with us today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for members' questions. I now recognize Dr. Borschevskaya for her opening statement. Welcome.
Chairman Self, Ranking Member Keating, honorable members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. With your permission, I am submitting my written testimony, and I'd like to summarize it. I would like to focus on 3 key issues. First, Turkey now has the potential to emerge as the primary naval power in the Black Sea. Second, the Russia-Turkey relationship is no longer decisively tilted in Russia's favor, though Russia still retains some advantages. Third, Turkey has maintained a pragmatic balancing act between Ukraine, Russia, and NATO after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All of this, Mr. Chairman and honorable members, means that the United States has an opportunity to use Turkey's new position to advance in the context of Russia's war on Ukraine, especially as the U.S. shifts its strategic investments towards the Indo-Pacific. So here's how we can dive into this opportunity to advance America's interests. Check Russia's ability to return to the Eastern Mediterranean. Russia will inevitably seek to return to the Eastern Mediterranean. It is a historic Russian aspiration. The U.S. should look for linkages between European and Middle East theaters. Turkey has outmaneuvered Russia in Syria. The U.S. could see how it can work constructively with Turkey to block Russia's influence there, to ensure Russia does not regain influence. Take advantage of Turkey's growing primacy in the Black Sea. Restoration of security in the Black Sea region is a goal Turkey and the West share. Over the long term, the U.S. should use the end of the war in Ukraine to limit Russia's presence, if not to expel Russia altogether from the Black Sea. It is in the U.S. interest to remove the threat of Russia from NATO's underbelly. In addition, neutralizing Russia in the Black Sea could also help blunt Russia's influence in the Levant. Support Turkey's normalization with Armenia and a peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan. If Ukraine is to achieve a lasting victory, the West will need to act outside Ukraine by putting Russia under pressure in other theaters, and specifically by depriving it of resources and influence in those regions. The South Caucasus is one such region. It is a vital strategic link between Europe and the Middle East. Loss of influence in the South Caucasus will hurt Russia strategically, because it will show Russia no longer has the same degree of control in its so-called near abroad. Promoting stability in this region is especially important now because Russia is gaining influence in Georgia. Work to reduce Turkey's dependence on Russian gas. Approximately 15% of EU gas still comes from Russia, and the revenue Russia generates helps it to fund its war effort in Ukraine. TurkStream and the new Turkish Blend project create an opportunity for Moscow to hide the origin of its gas and exert influence across Europe. The US could sanction companies involved in infrastructure of TurkStream and Turkish Blend. At the same time, the US could look for opportunities to work on alternative energy projects with Turkey to further eliminate dependence on Russia. Take advantage of Turkey's role as a mediator. Turkey's mediation in the Black Sea grain deal was useful even if the deal ultimately collapsed. To the extent that it is advantageous to US strategic interests, the US should leverage Ankar's role as a mediator in the future. Mr. Chairman, honorable members, how the war in Ukraine ends will have far-reaching implications for American credibility, security, and economy. It will affect American allies and partners across the world. If Russia is victorious, if Russia succeeds, it may lead to a bigger confrontation between Russia and NATO, along with NATO partners. In this context, the U.S. has an interest in focusing a constructive, pragmatic relationship with Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Borschevskaya. I now recognize Dr. Schanzer for his opening statement.
Chairman Self, Ranking Member Keating, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of Foundation for Defense of Democracies, thank you for the opportunity to testify. Turkey has made headlines since the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria collapsed late last year. This is because Turkey is the power broker behind the new government led by the al-Qaeda affiliate known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. Turkey's backing of al-Qaeda in Syria is not new. Since the Syrian civil war erupted in 2011, Turkey has supported several jihadi groups fighting the Assad regime. However, Assad didn't fall for 14 years, and that explains how the jihadi problem in Syria has grown worse. Ankara promotes HTS as a moderate entity. This is a farce. The violent history of HTS must not be ignored. The closest analog to this scenario, a designated terror group taking over an entire country, is the Taliban, and we know how that worked out for Afghanistan. Turkey also supports Hezbollah. Last month, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar revealed that Turkey is aiding Iran to smuggle funds to the Lebanese terror group. Last year, the U.S. imposed sanctions on a network in Turkey and Lebanon for funding the IRGC Quds Force and Hezbollah. Other Turkish-based entities have earned sanctions in recent years for similar reasons. Ankara is a leading patron of Hamas. For nearly 2 decades, Turkey has operated, openly backed rather, the terror group, providing political cover and financial support. In 2011, Palestinian sources alleged that Erdogan earmarked $300 million to Hamas. After the Gilad Shalit prisoner swap that year, scores of Hamas prisoners were deported to Turkey, including Salah Arori, one of the group's most dangerous terrorist operatives. In 2014, Arori ordered the killing of 3 teens in the West Bank, sparking a major war with Hamas that year. The Erdogan government cheered Arori when he claimed credit for that attack. After Hamas slaughtered 1,200 Israelis on October 7th, Erdogan doubled down on his Hamas support. He welcomed Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Istanbul just before he was killed by Israel in July 2024. The two discussed relocating Hamas's political headquarters from Qatar to Turkey. To this day, Turkey is a hub for Hamas's global finances. Numerous U.S. sanctions designations underscore this trend. GYO, a Turkish construction conglomerate, was designated by the U.S. in 2022 for generating revenue for Hamas. That company is still active today, as are other firms that are funding Hamas in Turkey. In December, U.S. legislators received a classified briefing about Turkey and Hamas. I hope that one theme emerged, namely that Erdogan has invested nearly 20 years legitimizing, funding, and empowering Hamas. So why does Erdogan support these terror groups? Because he aspires to regional, if not global, domination. And he thinks that supporting these groups can help him. The collapse of the Assad regime and the rise of HTS was Erdogan's first major Middle East conquest, and he wants more. During the Arab Spring, Turkey backed Islamist factions vying for power as ossified Middle East regimes collapsed, one after the next. Egyptian, Libyan, and other Islamist groups all look to Ankara for political and financial support. Some still get Turkish backing, hoping to replicate the success of HTS. Erdogan's Hamas rhetoric is a very clear attempt to position himself as a leader in the Muslim world. His failed call for an Islamic war against Israel led to nothing, but it was a clear attempt to rally the Muslim world around the Turkish flag. I'm also concerned about Turkey's blue homeland policy of aggression. Tensions are currently rising in the Eastern Med, with Turkish vessels challenging Greek and Cypriot vessels, even in their own exclusive economic zones. The U.S. can no longer afford to ignore Turkish aggression. A policy shift is needed, and I offer these recommendations. The U.S. should maintain its modest military presence in Syria to counter Turkish aggression. The U.S. should block Turkish attempts to deploy military forces or contractors anywhere in the Middle East. The U.S. should expose and punish Ankara's policy of allowing jihadi fighters and terror financiers to use Turkey as a transit and logistics hub. The U.S. should pressure Ankara to sever all ties with Hamas, including shutting down its offices, extraditing known operatives, and revoking travel documents. Failure to do so should result in tough sanctions. The U.S. should closely monitor Turkish involvement in weapons smuggling with a focus on Syria's borders with Jordan and Lebanon. And finally, Congress should limit any major arms sale to Turkey until it stops supporting terrorism and destabilizing NATO. I offer additional recommendations in my written testimony. I hope this subcommittee considers all of them. On behalf of FDD, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Dr. Schanzer. I now recognize Dr. Wallander for her opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Self, Ranking Member Keating, distinguished members of this committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today on one of the most consequential bilateral geopolitical relationships that the United States enjoys with a key ally, the Republic of Turkey. Turkey is a strong ally across key global security priorities of the United States. However, too often, Turkey is also at odds with U.S. policies and priorities. And at other times, the U.S. and Turkey share strong common interests, but have differing approaches to resolving problems that threaten American interests. I lay this out as the good, the bad, and the complicated. The good. For over 70 years, Turkey has been a strong frontline member of the NATO alliance. Spanning the Bosphorus and holding 1/3 of the Black Sea coast, Turkey has been key to credible defense and deterrence against Soviet and now Russian threat in Europe. Turkey's location affords NATO allies key overflight access for defense and surveillance operations across Southeast Europe. During the Cold War, Turkey played this vital alliance role along with Greece, the two forward locations for NATO in Southeast Europe. Today, they are joined by Bulgaria, Romania, and the Western Balkan allies to enable NATO air, sea, and ground defenses that force Russian military planners to contemplate defense from the Arctic to the Caucasus. With Turkey as a NATO ally, the Kremlin cannot afford to focus an attack on simply ground forces on one axis in Central Europe. The U.S. military is better able to fulfill its missions for European and global security because of our alliance with Turkey. The U.S. operates military bases in Incirlik and Izmir, along with other NATO allies. These bases support air, ground, and sea components of allied forces and support a network of sensors that provide warning and surveillance capacity to the alliance deep in Europe's eastern areas. Hosting U.S. military forces at these bases has meant that Turkey has enabled and supported U.S. operations and NATO deterrence for decades. Turkey has a strong industrial base, including production of some of the most advanced and innovative capabilities crucial to modern warfare, notably unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, military ships, and electronic warfare systems. Turkey has also invested in American-built advanced weapons that advance NATO's strength and interoperability, notably its fleet of F-16 fighters. This advanced capability is one of the forgotten stories in Ukraine's surprise success in the early months of Russia's invasion in 2022. One of the signature headline capabilities the Ukrainians used for surveillance and attack that caught the Russian army by surprise was Turkish aerospace industries produced Bayraktar UAVs. In a war that changed our understanding of how conventional conflict can and must be fought, that has led to the massive growth in production of UAVs for military use. The leading example was Turkey's use and development of UAVs. In other places globally, Turkey has contributed where American partners are supported by U.S. military forces. However, there is no question that at times Turkey has also taken actions that are contrary to American national security interests. We've already heard mention of Turkey's arming of Azerbaijan that led the President Aliyev to believe that he could achieve his objectives against Armenia and take territory in a way that led to the displacement and refugee status of tens of thousands of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians. Turkey has also acted against U.S. interests in NATO, and notably with delaying Finland and Sweden's memberships, and therefore sending a message to Putin of disunity within NATO. And Turkey did acquire the S-400 Russian system, putting at risk the entire European NATO F-35 program by operating and deploying that system. The complicated issue I want to highlight is Turkey's concerns and track record of striking at PKK-affiliated groups in northern Syria and in Iraq. For years, Turkey did this without coordination with the United States and often put at risk U.S. military forces exercising the counter-ISIS missions that the U.S. government has designated. With the change in Syrian leadership and the evolution of the government of Turkey's relationship with the leadership of the PKK within Turkey, there is an opportunity to build upon better communication, alignment in counterterrorism operations, namely counter-ISIS operations in Syria and Iraq, and perhaps begin to untangle this unfortunate period in U.S.-Turkey relations. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Dr. Schanzer, I'll start with you. Turkey has the second largest military in NATO after the United States, and we are hearing, and I'm hearing from individual delegations, that Europe is starting to expand their defense capabilities. As they expand their capabilities, what does that mean for Turkey and their participation in NATO? And specifically, I'd like to ask you to address Greece and the S-400.
Sure. Chairman Self, thank you for the question. First, I think there does need to be an assessment. I think it could be an interesting report, perhaps produced by the Congressional Research Service or some other. But to question this assertion that Turkey's army is invaluable to NATO. Its size does not mean that it is effective or that it's updated or that its army is capable of tangling with Russia or any other country for that matter. So I do think an assessment could be necessary. I think there is a question, though, among the European powers right now about Turkey's role within NATO and within Europe. Specifically, I think when we look at the number of clashes that have, or near clashes that have taken place in the Eastern Med, I'm concerned. Turkey has been very aggressive of late in challenging the Greeks and the Cypriots in their own exclusive economic zones. They have been engaged in illegal drilling, but they have also tried to assert, I mentioned in my spoken remarks, this blue homeland policy of denying countries in the region to be able to go into international waters. This cannot continue if the goal is to preserve even a modicum of stability within NATO. And I think it's crucial that we address this now. I would say that having the U.S. patrol with Greece may be actually useful. Having the Israelis patrol with Greece in the Eastern Med may be useful. But Turkey needs to understand that it needs to share these waterways. This is going to be crucial moving forward.
Thank you. Either of our other witnesses.
I would highlight the value of Turkish armed forces in the area of special operations forces. Turkey has contributed to, for example, the training of Somali special operations forces alongside American trained and equipped Somali, the Danab Brigade, which is aimed at preventing the success of al-Shabaab in Somalia and holding it at bay. Al-Shabaab is identified by American intelligence as the only terrorist organization in Africa with the capability and the intent to strike through global operations, including against the U.S. homeland. So there are areas of strength that we have worked, the United States has worked in cooperation with the Turkish armed forces. I would highlight that one in particular. I
I agree with my colleagues and want to add only one brief comment. Turkey's support for Ukraine, Turkey's military support for Ukraine, as Mr. Chairman, you've highlighted in your remarks, has been useful. And in that regard, I agree with everything my colleagues said, but there has to be a more of a nuanced approach to to our understanding of Turkish military.
Thank you for that. I want to ask about this rare earth element find. Can any of the three of you comment on that? Because one of the critical areas that we need to divorce ourselves from China is rare earths, critical minerals, because they're mined lots of places, but China controls 92% of the processed critical minerals.
I mean, it is certainly an opportunity to partner with Turkey in that commercial endeavor. The Trump administration has made clear that it is seeking those kinds of partnerships. And I, would simply observe, watching Chinese operations throughout Africa and the Middle East, if the United States is not active and offering a value proposition to countries, Chinese ability to move in with what look like very lucrative commercial opportunities usually create facts on the ground that are difficult to walk back.
Yeah, I would agree. The fact of the matter is, we are focused on great power competition as a trajectory of our foreign policy, and as such, focus on minerals is a part of this debate. Therefore, if we don't have a seat at the table, somebody else will fill in that space. It's better that we find a way to do it rather than our adversaries.
Thank you very much. You now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Time, if I keep going with this, but see if it resets my time, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. There are many here in Congress that don't think Ukraine is important to us back here at home, that what happens over there is their business, and we should worry about our own priorities here. And I'm looking at, as we discussed Turkey, I mentioned before, their involvement in keeping navigation and the Black Sea free. I sponsored the Black Sea Security Act, which was incorporated in the NDAA last year, to underscore this importance. Now, can you tell us how important, Dr. Wallander, it is to have the access through Odessa and through Ukraine, and make sure that doesn't fall in the hands of Russia, and what that would mean for our security, and what would it mean for economic impact worldwide and at home if that should fall to Russia?
Thank you, sir. There's a lot of focus the last 3 years on security assistance and how vital the ability for Ukraine to fight on the battlefield was to its survival, but its military success is both not enough, but also not possible without the Ukrainian economy. And Turkey's decision to invoke the Montreux Convention, the 1936 Montreux Convention, shut off the Russian Navy from being able to reinforce the Black Sea Fleet. And as Ukrainians were skilled in using various coastal defense capabilities and unmanned surface vehicles and sinking Russian ships, Russia was not able to repair or resupply the Russian Black Sea Fleet, to the point where the Russian Black Sea Fleet had to retreat from Sevastopol in Crimea to Novorossiysk, and it's stuck back in the eastern Black Sea. This has affected Russia's ability to launch attacks in the Odessa area. It has not eliminated, but it constrained Russia's ability to use surface ships to attack Ukrainian cities. And it is something that Russia has persistently, throughout the conflict, pressed Turkey to change, to allow Russian warships to enter the Black Sea, and Turkey has prevented that. So Ukraine's ability to send grain, to send manufactured goods out, to import the components for its own defense industry has vitally depended on the openness, the commercial openness of the Western Black Sea. And that will be a major element of any ceasefire or peace negotiation going forward as well.
And what would be your concerns if that fell into Russia's hands? And how would China view that change?
Control of the Black Sea would give Russia control of Eastern Europe. It would give control of not just the sea, but air flight, overflight permissions that the United States uses, for example, to access the Middle East. It would give Russia the ability to continue its stranglehold on Georgia, to influence Azerbaijan, support Azerbaijan in negotiations for a peace settlement in Armenia. I mean, the Black Sea as a Russian lake would be a significant strike against European security and American global access, working with our NATO partners and allies in the region.
Yeah, and following that along, the importance of that, in the aftermath of what happened last week in the Oval Office, disrupting our transatlantic alliances, there was a meeting of European leaders. The core of that, I thought, was to have a peace agreement that made sure there was a security component to that. We can't trust Putin's word. And there has to be a backstop to make sure that that's enforced. Can you tell us the importance of any agreement having that security agreement that if Putin does what he always does, lies and goes back on his word, that there would be some kind of security built into any agreement so that he couldn't advance himself with another aggressive attack, illegal, immoral attack on Ukraine?
Well, if you look at the track record of Russian failure to implement ceasefire agreements in Georgia, Russia has never lived up to the commitments that were made in 2008. Russia has never lived up to the commitments that it made to withdraw forces from Transnistria in Moldova, and Russia never implemented the successive Minsk agreements in 2014 and 2015. The first step in those agreements was a ceasefire. Russia never implemented it, and the international community only put in a lightly armed monitoring mission. So based on the track record, you would need a strong agreement, you would need a strong armed presence, not merely a peacekeeping presence, but a peace enforcement presence, and that would mean a substantial ground force with substantial air support as well.
Thank you. I think that's one of the most important things coming out of any agreement. I yield back.
I now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Green.
Chairman, Self and Ranking Member Keating, thank you for convening this hearing on the critical role Turkey plays in geopolitics today. Turkey's strategic location and strong military give it the unique ability to put NATO's security mandate into action. Yet, I do have some concerns about Turkey's willingness to do so. As a flight surgeon during the War on Terror, I served on the front lines balancing dual roles as a soldier and a healer. I treated U.S. NATO soldiers' combat wounds in the middle of firefights. Learning firsthand that strength against our enemies and building trust with our allies are inseparable duties. Today we're here to discuss both standing strong and building bridges. From the war in Gaza to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Turkey plays an integral role in the current geopolitical landscape. But these actions of late are, as I said, very concerning. From seeking membership with BRICS countries who clearly have taken a position to destabilize the United States dollar, to attempting to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, I do see some red flags. This explicit flirtation with U.S. adversaries undermines NATO's cohesion. The purchase of the Russian S-400 missile systems, dragging its feet on Sweden and Finland's admission to NATO, and continuing to fund terror groups just doesn't go with what the goals, doesn't align with the goals of the United States or NATO. Turkey's conflicting loyalties are exemplified by the role it played in Russia's war on Ukraine. Turkey closed the Bosporus and the Dardanelles to Russia and supplied drones to Kyiv, but it also helped Russia evade sanctions. In Syria, Turkey's antagonism against our allied Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces jeopardizes the mission to defeat ISIS. This could lead to an ISIS resurgence. We all know what that would be. My hope for Turkey is that it will give up its support for Hamas, renew strong economic relationships with Israel, and together that these two countries can revitalize the Middle East. But this isn't going to happen if Turkey chooses to support terrorist proxies. Now, I will say that Turkey has a unique position in the world. Its history with Russia, its Ottoman heritage and its relationship with the West. Sort of like threading a needle, if you will. And there seems to be in foreign policy, or at least my study of it in foreign affairs and history, the approach, I like to call it the put a foot in each bucket approach, or a foot in every bucket approach. And I get, for example, a nation like India that desires to be a third or fourth pole in the multipolar system of the world might do things that are both pro-American and are aligned with Russia or China at various points in time. I get that. However, we don't have a treaty like NATO with India. And that leaves us to ask hard questions. And I think, you know, in being as fair as I possibly can with that unique history, that geopolitical position, or that location, the geographic location of the country and the challenges around it, I just want to ask first Dr. Schanzer, what external pressure would the United States need to put on Turkey for it to properly distance itself from Hamas?
Congressman Green, thank you for the question. Look, I don't know what the exact answer is, but I do know that Turkey does respond to sanctions pressure. We saw this with during the first Trump administration. Pastor Brunson had been taken hostage by the Turkish government. The Trump administration put significant sanctions on Erdogan's inner circle, really began to target his closest allies in government, and the threats began to ratchet up, and then he released Pastor Brunson. I believe that the threat of sanctions on Turkey could economic pressure as a place to start, but I think we need to consider other ways that we can put pressure on them as well, political, diplomatic, but giving them the leverage that they have right now in NATO doesn't help. And of course, there is no mechanism for releasing them from NATO.
Let me ask one other quick question, because I'm about to run out of time, and you guys can respond in writing. Can Erdogan run for re-election? Is he going to run for re-election if he can? And if he doesn't run for re-election, is it the Istanbul mayor? I mean, who's the heir apparent in Turkey? I'd love to get that in writing because I'm now out of time. Thank you.
I now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Phyllis McCormick.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Although Turkey and Israel restored full diplomatic ties in 2022, relations have dramatically worsened since Hamas's October 7th attack and Israel's military operation in Gaza. Erdogan has taken a very harsh stance against Israel, and in May of 2024, Turkey stopped all trade with Israel until a permanent ceasefire is achieved in Gaza, and humanitarian aid is allowed without interruption. Under Erdogan, Turkey has provided consistent political support to Hamas and has periodically hosted Hamas's political officials. What is the nature of Turkey's relationship with Hamas, and how is it likely to affect Turkey's ability to, one, improve its relationship with Israel, two, play a role in mediating Israel-Palestine conflict, and three, assist with post-conflict recovery and reconstruction in Gaza?
I'll take it. That's for me. Thank you for the question.
Yes.
Look, the relationship between Turkey and Hamas goes back to at least 2006. That was the first time we saw a major delegation hosted by Erdogan. We saw Erdogan get into an open fight with Shimon Peres, then president of Israel, Nobel Prize laureate, accusing him essentially of war crimes. Then we began to see the money flowing from Turkey. We began to see more operatives finding a home in Turkey, businesses created in Turkey, operatives planning and executing attacks out of Turkey. We just put it this way: Turkey is, to the letter of the law, a state sponsor of terrorism as it relates to Hamas. They are unquestionably the largest jurisdiction right now for Hamas operatives and for Hamas finance in the world. That is obviously deeply troubling when we think about the fact that this is a NATO ally and a country that we rely on for a modicum of stability in the Middle East. So as of right now, especially after October 7th, I see no way forward between Turkey and Israel if Turkey's policies continue along these lines. They have not stood down. They have not dialed back on their Hamas support. If anything, Erdogan appears to be more committed to this terror group right now. And I think this is why this hearing in particular strikes me as so crucial at this moment.
And what steps do you think the U.S. should take to addressing the risk of Turkey's continued support to Hamas?
Oh, I think we need to make very clear demands right now on Hamas. I mean, number one, I think we should be sanctioning Turkey for any evidence we have. We know there are a number of companies right now that are throwing off cash for Hamas and sending it to the Gaza Strip. There are charities that are doing the same. I think they need to be designated by the Treasury Department. We need to be demanding the extradition of Hamas operatives that are based in Turkey. We should be asking the Turks to revoke travel documents that have been issued formally by the Turkish government to Hamas operatives. There are many steps that we can take that we have yet to take. I cannot tell you exactly why we haven't taken them, and I would actually argue that it is a bipartisan problem. Both Democrats and Republicans have failed to address this. I think maybe for fear of upsetting the alliance that we have with the Turks, knowing that they're NATO allies and that they have vital roles to play in other areas. But I think they have fallen down on the job as American allies if they are so openly and willingly supporting a violent group like Hamas.
As the Syrian people emerge for decades under Assad's brutal dictatorship, I'm concerned about Turkish actions against Syria's Kurds community in support of fully inclusive Syria, representative of all its people. I'm also equally concerned about the potential rise of ISIS in Syria and the dangerous consequences of freezing forward aid to that region. This is not just a matter of foreign policy. This is a national security issue, and the consequences will be felt right here at home. This evil terrorist group committed heinous terrorist attacks, including the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando that killed 49 people. Let me be clear. Foreign aid is not a handout, it is an investment in our national security. That aid helped prevent ISIS from regaining strength and keeps local forces trained and equipped and stabilizes communities so terrorism does not take root again. But by cutting it off, we are giving ISIS exactly what it wants, a power vacuum, a weakened opposition, and a chance to rebuild. And who will pay for this mistake? It will be the American people, unfortunately. Humanitarian needs in Syria are at an all-time high. In 2024, 16.7 million people were estimated to require assistance, the largest number since the beginning of the civil war in 2011. We're either going to feed them now or we're going to end up fighting them later. Ms. Wallander, do Turkish officials seek to weaken U.S.-backed Kurdish forces, such as the SDF, which are a strong counterterrorist partner to the United States and its European allies?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The Turkish government has stated, or when I served in government until January, stated that it sees an opportunity to now distinguish PKK affiliated groups in northern Syria and in northern Iraq, expect them to be disarmed and to cease their operations, but not to act against Syrian Kurdish groups that are not affiliated with PKK. Now is the time to test that commitment and see whether they can live up to it, because it would be significant progress, but their actions need to meet their words.
Thank you.
I now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Kim.
Thank you, Chairman Self and Ranking Member Keating, for holding today's hearing, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. Turkey has expressed its desire to have a close relations with both the West and the East, and it is first a NATO member that has openly asked to join BRICS, which is led by our adversaries, Russia and China. So I want to ask you, I'm going to direct this question to any one of you. What are the top drivers for Turkey's pursuit of BRICS membership or partner country status?
Briefly, thank you, Congresswoman. So I think that what Turkey often points to, I'm not advocating this, is the limitations of their integration in the European Union and the economic opportunities there. I I don't necessarily think that that is a good argument for, as you point out, seeking deeper economic relations with America's two top strategic competitors, Russia and China, because the relationships of economic trade with Europe don't bring with them dependence and influence in a way that trade, investment, and economic entanglement with China and Russia do. And the United States should be very clear with Turkey that our own economic relations, our own integration in different industries would be limited.
Turkey's membership in BRICS or like Shanghai Cooperation Organization likely?
I don't know that, I think that Russia in particular would see that as a prize because of the influence. I think that it would extend China's influence in the European terrain, given that Europe itself is now quite resistant to Chinese influence in the economic sphere. So I do think it is a risk, and I think you put your finger on something important.
I think you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I'd love to add this, that I believe that Turkey's dalliance in both sides of this equation reflects the President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan's deep discomfort with American values, with Western values. I don't think that he feels like he belongs there. This is a man who identifies very openly as an Islamist. This is a man who does not put a lot of faith in democracy, and you can see he's already testing the limits of the democracy in Turkey, and he's putting strain on the judiciary, putting strain on the media. I would actually argue that he's been eviscerating Turkey's democracy. It wasn't exactly strong to begin with, but it continues to weaken. This is driving Turkey into the hands of some of these other organizations populated by less liberal countries. You can see the alliances or the semi-alliances that Turkey has maintained with the likes of Iran over the years, or engaging in illicit financial activity with the Russians. This is a man who does not see himself squarely fitting within NATO, and that's why we are watching him stray into these other organizations.
Let me address this. I saw the Pew Research Center polling from 2024, where it says fewer than 20% of Turks have a favorable view of the United States, while their favorable rating of China is 30%, and their rating for Russia is 26%. So why do you think this is the case? And how can the U.S. gain greater favorability among the Turks?
Look, a lot of what we see right now is actually the result of the manipulation of the Turkish media, which is fully controlled or almost fully controlled by Recep Tayyip Erdogan. If you want to see some of the public sentiment begin to shift, maybe allow for more liberal media. Once upon a time, there was a lot more of it. Now there's not. I would say that is a major point of concern. But as for exactly why Turks feel the way they do, I think you'd have to ask the Turks.
And then they have more than 40% of Turks, they have a favorable view of NATO and the European Union. Why is that? Why do you think that's the case?
I think I wish it were higher. I think the favorable view is that in between. Turks see themselves also as European and see the NATO alliance as contributing to Turkish security, although they have concerns about terrorism, but also the aspiration to play a role as a leading European country. So I think that is rooted in the country, but it is also balanced by, I agree with Jonathan, by the views of having larger global aspirations as well.
I wish I can engage more with you, but my time's up, so I'll yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Johnson.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. It's an honor to be on this subcommittee. I have been listening to your testimony with great interest. It's been fascinating to me. The U.S.-Turkey relationship is complex and sometimes challenging, as you have well educated us here today. Turkey has continued to engage with Hamas, which has fueled a heartbreaking conflict in the Middle East that many of my constituents keenly feel. But even Turkey consistently rejects Russia's claim over Ukraine and joining the free world in voting for the United Nations resolution and opposite of the U.S. vote, where we, unfortunately and tragically, cast our vote to align with Russia and North Korea, two dictatorships that represent the opposite of our values. In voting against our allies and voting against peace in the region. So my question is, does this sort of give permission, this signal by the United States to align with Russia and China and North Korea, does that give permission for Turkey to do the same?
Yeah, I think I think you're making a very important point here, and I think it points to the larger geostrategic dilemmas that we're facing as part of this discussion. Because as we've all discussed here today, Turkey is a very problematic ally, and yet, on the one hand, it supports Hamas. Its actions oftentimes go against our values. And yet, when we think about the bigger geopolitical picture, as you brought up Ukraine right now, we have to think about how do we navigate? What's the way forward? How do we go forward from here? And I think, well, first, if I may go back to the earlier part of our discussion with Turkey, Representative Kim's comment, the problem is Turkey's actions Turkey does not align with our values. And so what we need to, when we think about the way forward in our relationship with Turkey, is looking towards interests rather than values, and that's a very different way of looking at this issue, because we tend to, when we think about the NATO alliance, we certainly think of a values-based alliance.
You know, many of you all testified that, well, I love your analysis, sort of the good, the bad, and the complicated. On the one hand, we really much need Turkey. We need their policing in the Black Sea. We need the openness that provides to the region. We need so much from them. But they're acting very bad, you know, like a very bad child. And, you know, if you had to say which interest is more important to the United States, if you have to pick a policy path, is it more important to rein in their bad behavior? Or is it more important to keep them wanting to be on our side?
So a global superpower, the United States, most powerful country in the world, doesn't have to choose. We have influence. We can work with not just Turkey, but other countries with who we can solve problems and advance American interests, but we can also hold them to account. And for example, I fully support and believe it was a constructive move for Congress to include Turkey under the CATSA sanctions, precisely because by buying the S-400 system, Turkey was putting U.S. pilots and NATO pilots at risk.
Right. So we need to step up our game, I think. It seems like the diplomacy in this country needs to be elevated to a high level, and to make sure that we rein in their bad behavior. It's what's really sounding like their interaction with Hamas, their interactions with terrorist groups, their support, their running to Russia and China are all such things that should be very, very concerning to the United States. It needs to be a top focus of our interactions with them. Is that fair?
Well, I think that's fair, and I would add to that, Turkey is certainly not choosing. Turkey is making it very clear in its behavior that they don't want to choose. All of its actions after Russia's invasion of Ukraine show that they, on the one hand, were certainly supportive of Ukrainian territorial integrity, but they also continue to do business with Russia. As we discussed, Turkey is talking about joining the BRICS. So if Turkey is not willing to choose, we as a superpower certainly don't have to choose, and we can balance, and in fact, it is the prerogative of a superpower to be able to focus on more than one priority at a time.
I'll only add one thing here. We're entering into an era of great power competition. We hear this all the time. We're going to have to deal with China. We're going to have to deal with Russia. We've got great challenges on the horizon. We need reliable allies, period. We need to make demands of our allies. And by the way, Turkey's not alone. You've got countries like Qatar that are supporting Hamas. You've got countries like Oman that are supporting the Houthis. None of this should be allowed to continue under an alliance structure that demands discipline, That's what I think we need to start to see out of our diplomats, out of our State Department, out of our White House. I think this has gone on for too long.
The gentlelady's
Thank you all so
time is
very
up.
much.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, Secretary Wallander, I want to thank you for your analysis about the Black Sea, how important it is. And I'm really grateful that Ranking Member Keating raising that issue up, because we've already seen the efforts by the collaboration between War Colonel Putin, the Chinese Communist Party, and the regime in Tehran. And it was October 26 that the War Colonel Putin rigged the presidential elections in the Republic of Georgia. And the consequence of that is that now there's an effort by the Chinese Communist Party to scheme and build a port on the Black Sea. And so the collaboration between the axis of evil is clearer every day, and we should be supporting, indeed, as Europe is, the legitimate President Salome Zurishvili of the Republic of Georgia, and call for new and fair and free elections. With that in mind, America and Turkey have been NATO allies, while beginning even in 1952 with Turkish soldiers fighting alongside with Americans in the Korean War and in every conflict since, including I've had my son serve with Turkish troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's always been ups and downs in our relationship, but I believe that ultimately what we have is mutual benefit should be a basis of our partnership for ultimate good results for both of our countries and for freedom and democracy. Additionally, Turkey has been crucial for the victory in the Cold War, defeating communism, liberating countries of Central and Eastern Europe, of Central Asia, of the Caucasus. We have worked together, and we need to focus on that. And indeed, we have been partners in the global war on terrorism. And the Turkish-American community, for over 130 years, has been very assimilated into American society as business leaders, and so appreciated. And I was grateful to actually host the Turkish ambassador, Sedat Önal, to the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. And I was grateful that he was there with Senator Scott of my state, Tim Scott, and Senator Lindsey Graham, Governor Henry McMaster. Everybody welcomed the ambassador, and it was just so positive that actually the ambassador came to Columbia, South Carolina after the election, and I was grateful to have him welcomed by Mayor Dan Rickham and by Carl Blackstone, Chamber of Commerce President, the Secretary of Commerce, Republican and Democrat legislators. So every effort, I think, should be made to reinforce the relationship that's been so beneficial. And I'm also grateful that President Donald Trump, as we saw last night, believes in a pragmatic foreign policy in reducing the burdens on America. I really appreciate that President Donald Trump has praised Turkey and Saudi Arabia for working with the new government in Syria. Additionally, Qatar, too, has been helpful with the new government in Syria. And what we need to do is to seek to end the conflicts and the self-declared enemies of America in Middle East and North Africa who create the migration crisis to Europe. And we should be, I believe, working with Turkey for stabilization in the area. And indeed, I'm really grateful Turkey has played a positive role supporting assistance to Ukraine from the beginning, and also agreeing to possibly send peacekeepers to Ukraine. And then it's also that Turkey was so critical in the fall of the narco-trafficking Assad Syrian regime. And with that in mind, we should be working, and we can already see that the foreign minister of the regime in Tehran condemned Turkey yesterday, calling their actions for free Syria as unconstructive, when in fact, Turkey has been working to publicly calling for the rights of women and Christians. With all of this in mind, Dr. Borschevskaya, what's the best way for the U.S. to encourage positive progress working with the country of Turkey?
So thank you for the question. I think the best way to encourage positive progress is to be very pragmatic and practical and compartmentalize our relationship. Again, Turkey is a problematic ally on many fronts, but we also need it, and it is part of NATO. Specifically in Syria, we have an incredible opportunity. With Assad in power, Syria had no chance, and the rest of the Middle East would continue to be unstable. In other words, Syria stood at the center of terrorism, of narco-trafficking, of enormous instability that harmed our direct national security interests and the interests of our allies. Now we're in an era of uncertainty. We have a lot of questions about where Syria goes. But at least Syria has a modicum of a chance. And the best way we can ensure that is to be present, to have a seat at the table, to attempt to shape the outcome. That is what we need to do. And here we can look for ways on how Turkey can be helpful, along with keeping our own presence in Syria, keeping our troops in Syria. So again, compartmentalize the relationship, be pragmatic.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank the ranking member for this hearing. It's important, and I want to kind of go beyond bridging the gap between East and West. Turkey has been a challenge, and you talked about the good, the bad, and the complicated, I think. Previous witness, I apologize if I'm asking questions that have already been asked, and please let me know. But I'm very perplexed and troubled by the Turkey's influence and its unwillingness to understand the importance of its agreements with Armenia and its engagement with Azerbaijan that I think really threaten Armenians' ability to continue to focus toward the Western interests. Would you care to comment?
Thank you, Congressman. I very much appreciate your question. Turkey has an opportunity to help resolve a tragic, long-standing dispute.
They
and
do,
instead,
but they've not been helpful. Their history's not been there.
Exactly. Instead, Turkey helped to arm Azerbaijan to the point where President Aliyev believed and had a military advantage. And rather than continuing to work with the international community, Turkey included for a peaceful resolution of the unresolved dispute,
Well,
the
and it's not
balance
clear
to
to me
allow that.
what
So
role
I-
this administration is going to play in supporting Armenia's efforts there. Nagorno-Karabakh, which you both referenced, was outrageous what they did there. 120,000 refugees that are now in Armenia, and not recognizing that historic artsakh, as the Armenians like to refer to it as. I want to switch about Ukraine here. Some of my colleagues here on the other side talk about that we should leave the war in Ukraine to the president. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think they did so when Joe Biden was president. I think Congress must assert its role during the oversight responsibility on behalf of the American people. Russia was the aggressor that invaded Ukraine. Putin is the dictator. Russia is a syndicate masquerading as a country with a mob boss called Putin. And I think if you look at through those lens, that prism, you understand the dynamics that we're dealing with here in trying to reach a peace. Do you believe, either of you, that this president giving up our leverage in negotiations while kneecapping Ukraine's military capabilities on the battlefield, most recently today or yesterday, that we're not going to share the ability for them to target key targets?
Congressman, President Putin believes he is winning. He believes his economy can continue to produce the weapons that are being used to attack Ukraine. For 3 years, we have disabused him of that notion. And to get leverage, to get President Putin to the table for a peace agreement, which I believe a just peace agreement would be in Ukraine's interest because it allows Ukraine to return on its path of Euro-Atlantic integration, you need to impose costs on President Putin, economic and military costs.
So when you hear the vice president's comments at the Munich summit Security Council, when you hear the vote on the UN last Monday, siding with autocrats and dictatorships against our democratic allies, when you see the debacle on Friday, would you say this is either gross incompetence or malign intent, or neither, in terms of what we need to be doing to reach a ceasefire, ultimately to get a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia?
I, along probably with Anna, have closely watched what is said in Moscow, and to all of those
I
instances,
think they're
you know,
popping champagne in the Kremlin right now.
they have explicitly said that all of those developments are in Russia's interest and are going to support Russian
So
success.
tell
in
me, why
Ukraine.
is the success of Ukraine beneficial to our national security, and why should Americans care about what Ukraine's fate is?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please. I'm running out of time.
Success of Ukraine is vital to our national security interests, because if Russia is not stopped in Ukraine, NATO and Europe at large will most likely have to face a bigger
And
war in Europe.
Georgia and Moldova and possibly the Baltic states, they've already undermined the Romanian presidential election. We know what Putin's intentions are. He's made it clear. He wants to recreate the old Soviet Union. He thinks he's a reincarnation of Peter the Great. That's the bottom line, and that's what we should understand when we're dealing with Russia.
I absolutely agree with you.
Thank you.
I recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Zinke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a lot of experience with Turkey military, and I do recognize the contributions of the Korean War. I fought in Kosovo with Turkish troops, both armor, infantry, and have a great deal of joint operations experience with their special forces. And I respect their military, and their military is actually key to NATO. But I have concerns about PPK, YPG. You talk about a thorn in the side between the two countries. We have a thorn in the side called ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Turkey has also a thorn in the side called PPK and YPG. And a friend of our enemies is not necessarily a friend of ours. And I do think, recognize the United States made a mistake diplomatically of not separating PPK, YPG from Kurds. I have a lot of experience with the Peshmerga, and I give the analogy of an Irish. Not all Irish are IRA, and not all Kurds are PPK or YPG. But I think there's a recognition that PPK and YPK are responsible for at least 30,000 deaths of Turkish, which is 10 times what happened on 9/11. So how do we separate in Syria the Kurds that are Marxist, Leninist, terrorist organizations from Kurds that support democracy that may not be our type of democracy, but certainly aren't terrorist organizations? And Ms. Wallander, I would love to hear a comment from you.
Thank you, Congressman. I would give an example, and you yourself pointed to it, which is Turkey's relationship with the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq and with the Peshmerga is quite positive. They've worked constructively with those entities and with the government of Iraq, the federal government of Iraq in Baghdad, on counterterrorism operations at times. At times, there's been frictions because they've unilaterally struck at PKK elements in northern Iraq. But the fundamental reality is that it is possible, and we should hold Turkey to it, to be able to distinguish between the terrorist organizations and units such as PKK and not, as you point out, incorrectly, with a broad brush, characterize all Kurds with that same category. And they've done it in Iraq, and we should hold them to that now with the opportunity in Syria.
And I have an equal concern about Turkey's support of Hamas, because they have. They offer harbor, they offer financial assistance at times, although not as much as Iran. Doctor, how can we? I mean, is it possible also to your idea, if we have a deal where we don't support the YPG, PKK, do you think it's possible for Turkey to stop their support of Hamas, which is an irritant to us?
I think I think it's wishful thinking, unfortunately, Mr. Congressman. I would say that right now, Turkey has pushed all of its chips into the middle of the table as it relates to Hamas. I'd also argue for al-Qaeda, for that matter, for HTS in Syria. I don't think there's any walking back from that. This is an ideological commitment that this government has made to the Muslim Brotherhood and its offshoots and even some worse movements. I think a reckoning is needed here. I don't think a deal is what's needed to get them to stop this support. At this point, I am convinced, after watching this play out since 2006, I believe that significant American pressure is what is needed in order to force a divorce between Hamas and Turkey.
And Dr. Hanna, do you also share the same opinion?
Yes, I share that opinion. I think pressure is needed. I also think, again, when we think about our bigger geostrategic interests in Syria, our presence in this region is what's going to create that pressure, but also our engagement and our willingness to show that we're not leaving this region, that we are committed to our interests, and we are not we're not fair weather friends.
And Doctor, you comment on that if you'd like.
Yeah, the job is not done in Syria. ISIS remains a threat. The detention facilities, if not monitored and kept secure, would be a huge setback in American and global security. And so the job is not done.
Thank you, sir. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I recognize the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Ammo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, while I appreciate the focus on Turkey, I think this subcommittee on Europe should be discussing the most dire threat to European security. That's Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine. That's right, Russia. And again, so we align on some facts, it was Russia that invaded Ukraine and launched an unprovoked war. It is an aggressive Russia that poses one of the greatest threats to Europe's freedoms, stability, and democratic values. It's Russia who now believes the visions, the visions of our two nations are aligned. So instead of having a hearing to address the threat posed by Vladimir Putin, this committee is looking the other way, literally. No one should choose to sit back and let President Trump parrot Kremlin propaganda and blow up our European relationships. Make no mistake, the scene caused by the president and vice president at the White House last Friday was unnerving. It was, in my opinion, disgraceful. Ukrainians are dying every day to defend democracy, yet our colleagues were more concerned about President Zelensky and the flattering that he should have done of President Trump and his wardrobe than the existential war that he's fighting. So unlike my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I cannot stay silent while our president sides with a dictator over our allies. Abandoning our allies, refusing to send them aid, belittling leaders in public does not make the United States stronger. It makes us weaker. It is clear that America first is rapidly turning into Putin first and America alone. Instead of leading by example, our president is siding with North Korea and Iran at the United Nations, voting to protect Russia. This is not the company we want to keep. Now, I recognize that Turkey is the subject of today's hearing, a NATO member that has offered to host peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. Turkey has also pushed back against false Russian claims to Ukrainian land. But while Turkey supports sovereign territory in Ukraine, they fail to support it in their own backyard, in countries like Armenia. In 2023, Turkey provided material support for Azerbaijan's brutal campaign of ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, the ancestral home of the Armenian people. The United States supports Armenia. We provided over $57 million in foreign assistance to Armenia last year, including humanitarian assistance for refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh. But this assistance was halted by President Trump's illegal foreign aid freeze. It is yet another example of Trump abandoning an ally, all while Turkey has reportedly discussed establishing a corridor to connect with Azerbaijan across Armenia's sovereign territory. So I know that Mr. Costa touched on this a bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper. Ms. Wallander, what steps can the United States take to push back on Turkey's support of Azerbaijan's aggression against Armenia? And how can the United States dissuade Turkey and Azerbaijan from encroaching on Armenia's sovereignty with a ground transport corridor?
Thank you so much, Congressman. I agree with you that Turkey has played a negative role in the last couple of years on this conflict, and it is difficult to imagine that Azerbaijan would come to the table with a reasonable and equitable and just resolution without Turkey's positive influence. The specifics could be to look at specific arms transfers that contributed to the loss of life and the expulsion of those tens of thousands of Armenians from that region. It also could look at possible sanctions on Turkish relations with Russia in the technology sphere that fuels some of those defense industrial productions. I do think targeted sanctions, if they were used for leverage to push towards diplomacy, could help Turkey to play a constructive role in influencing, in particular, Azerbaijan.
And could you speak a little bit to the ground transport corridor specifically?
I don't have any secret ideas or public ideas of how to succeed in pressing that ground transit corridor. I would appeal to Turkey's principled support of the UN and international law for Ukraine and ask them to consider no less in recognizing the international community's obligation for Armenia to be able to have control of its own territory, to negotiate an acceptable solution to the issues of transport with Azerbaijan, and offer, the kind of positive influence and example that the Turkish leadership so often seeks.
Thank you. I yield back.
I now recognize the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Sorry to walk right in here. Well, thank you. As y'all have been hearing and talking about, amidst the numerous challenges throughout the region, preserving peace in the Middle East is vital. Now, as a reliable and stable security partner in the region, Greece best represents U.S. interests there. Allowing Greece to maintain the qualitative and strategic advantage over Turkey is crucial in this respect. It provides a deterrent to Turkey's historic aggression towards Greece, which shouldn't be upset. And this balance would be upended if Turkey were to acquire F-35s. Despite the recent easing of tensions between Greece and Turkey, Erdogan's fundamental positions and claims in violation of Greek and Cypriot sovereignty remain unchanged. This year saw a sudden uptick in Turkey's violations of Greece's airspace, while the violations of its territorial waters continued throughout the last year. Meanwhile, Erdogan is cozying up to Hamas and threatening to invade Israel. Yet Greece continues to play a constructive role in the region by promoting energy security through the 3+1 Great Sea Interconnector, providing crucial assistance for Ukraine as Russia continues its war of aggression, and serving as a responsible NATO member by working with the U.S. to coordinate mutual security goals. Greece's responsible allyship promotes U.S. interest in the region, while Turkey seems only interested in promoting Erdogan's neo-Ottoman ambitions. I would ask Dr. Schanzer, is it? If the U.S. has imposed CAATSA sanctions on any other NATO ally besides Turkey?
No, it is not.
Yeah.
No other ally has acquired the Russian S-400 system. No other ally has put our technology and our allies at risk the way the Turks have. And I'm actually shocked that this crisis continues so many years after it began. It's actually inconceivable to me that we have not forced this crisis to a suitable conclusion. I understand that Turkey put itself in a pickle, but that's not our problem any longer. We need that S-400 out of Turkey. But I would also just like to say the way that you have just characterized what's happening in the Eastern Med is exactly as I understand it. I think Greece has done more than its fair share to shoulder its load, and it continues to come under attack, under threat from Turkey. The question is, at some point, what does the United States do to help support our allies in Greece? I do think that there's an opportunity to perhaps forge some kind of mechanism that would enable the U.S., Israel, and Greece to work together for the betterment of security in the East Med. I sincerely hope we see that materialize in the months or years to come.
I do too. I think Greece is strategically located geopolitically to play a leadership role in that area. Just to add to that, are there any other NATO allies who occupy a country the way that Turkey occupies Cyprus? And are there any other NATO allies that are actively seeking BRICS membership or status with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? I think I know the answer. No?
Oh, you're correct.
Okay, thank you. One other question. In your written testimony, you mentioned Turkey's blue homeland policy of dominating the Eastern Mediterranean. Could you elaborate on this for a little bit and tell us how it threatens Greece and Cypriot sovereignty in the region?
Oh, absolutely. What Turkey has done is it has extended its the way it views its own territorial waters to cover effectively almost all of the Eastern Med. It's almost as if Cyprus doesn't exist. It's as if Greece doesn't exist. They've got a relationship, an agreement with Libya that basically wipes Cyprus off the map, right? And all the while we see illegal drilling, Turkey drilling in the territorial waters off of Cyprus and near Greece. When you see Greek and Cypriot vessels coming out of their exclusive economic zones into international waters, they're challenged by Turkish vessels. This is extremely aggressive, and it is articulated in this blue homeland policy that this is the design of Turkey. It's to dominate the Eastern Med. I would argue that the conquest of Syria by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the al-Qaeda group, has now made Greece, Israel, and Cyprus and other countries in the region very alarmed. They see now a surge in power on the part of the Turkish regime, and I get the sense right now that they're looking to work together to begin to counter it.
Doesn't sound like Turkey's a very reliable ally to me. Thank you, and I yield back.
No, ma'am.
Thank you. We're going to recognize the ranking member and the chair for a second round of questioning, and I'll go ahead and let the ranking member begin. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to use the second round to go back at statements made by our witnesses, and there's two that I'd like to emphasize. Number one, Dr. Schanzer said, we need reliable allies. I couldn't agree more. But honestly, right now, U.S., on the part of our closest allies, our transatlantic allies, that reliability is openly being questioned. Just recent comments by French officials, German officials, our Scandinavian allies. It's clear. I don't have to go. They're public record. But I can see their point. After looking at the U.S. taking an ally like Ukraine and cutting off its intelligence capabilities that were so integral to success here, cutting off weapons funding, just important for just their survival as a country. The actions where we've distanced ourselves from our allies at the UN, and the comments in the aftermath of the Oval Office incident of last week, which prompted an emergency meeting of our European allies in Great Britain. These all make us less reliable. So I'd like to ask question one, how important is this reliability? And since I believe it's unmistakable, these are the words of our allies themselves, essentially saying we're not reliable, how important that is that America first can't be America alone. Now, the second point was brought up, I'm not sure which witness brought it, but it was on you know, how come Turkey has a view of the U.S., you know, of only 20% favorable? And the comments of our witnesses were, well, Erdogan's repression of journalists and free press really resulted in the people of Turkey not getting a full message and not a clear message and a very skewed message. So the second question I have is the importance of funding and making sure we're positioning our Radio Free Europe and our Radio Liberty capabilities, making sure that those things are able and present to break through, you know, that very problem that you know, our witnesses raised themselves. And I question that given funding threats in the past. I question it, frankly, by the advancing of Carrie Lake, a 7-time election denier, to lead that entity. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned on the reliability, and I'm concerned on our ability to get democratic messages through Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. I'll start with Dr. Wallander.
Thank you, Congressman. So Russia will be able to rebuild its military and adjust its military and be poised to be able to threaten not just Ukraine, but NATO. Assessments are in about 5 years. European countries, as of last year, 23, were meeting at least the 2% of GDP spending on defense, and many more are moving towards that. And what we've heard in the last couple of months is a determination to spend even more and invest in defense industrial base. The United States is on the cusp of achieving something that American leaders have demanded of Europe for 75 years, of NATO, which is that European countries really invest in their defense and really take the lead in defending the country with the United States as an ally. But it's going to take them some time. And at this point, being that reliable ally, giving Europe the opportunity to take that leadership role, to free up the United States for our important global challenges, especially strategic competition and the pacing challenge of China, it's within our grasp. And we have that opportunity to have that success that presidents across both Republican and Democratic leaderships have sought for decades.
Importance of global media?
The importance of
Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty?
Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty are respected as credible and important sources of alternative information across the globe, but I mean, as resources, but especially given the Cold War history, even in countries that have free media. It's an alternative source of information. It's a source about America, but it has to be credible. It has to be about free media, and it is a huge asset in making the American case and building that trust that enables us to have access in Europe that is so important for our global security.
I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to take 4 minutes on this next question. We've danced around S-400s and F-35s. So starting with you, Dr. Schanzer, Greece, Israel, Turkey seem to me to be the players in this, as well as NATO as a whole, of course. Would you just outline the issue for us? Because this is a major issue in NATO in my mind.
It is, and I thank you for raising it, Chairman Self. We spoke about this before the hearing. There is, of course, there are different variants of the F-35, and I think Israel would have a superior one to whatever Turkey might acquire, and I'm sure it's superior to whatever Greece has. I am concerned, however, about giving this platform in any form to this government in Turkey. I think that it will be used to further Turkey's aggressive posture in the region. I would fear clashes between Greece and Turkey, would not want to put both Greek and Turkish F-35s in the sky as they battle over Alexandroupolis or other key areas as tensions rise in the Eastern Med. I know the Israelis are steadfastly opposed right now to this government, this government in Turkey, which has called for a pan-Islamic war against Israel, rewarding them with the F-35. Now, they were removed from this program because of their acquisition of the Russian S-400 system. We should not put them back on, and I would argue that even if they relinquish the S-400, there should be a cooling off period, probably several years, before we begin to consider furnishing them with an F-35, because there needs to be a price to pay when our allies disobey clear directives. As we gave the Turks, we said, do not buy that S-400. They did so anyway. They should pay a steep price. They should be made an example of, I think, right now, for all of our other allies to see.
Either of the other two doctors?
I'll speak to this.
Dr. Wallander.
I have a somewhat different view. I believe that Turkey I believe the right decision was made to remove Turkey from the F-35 program, to not deliver the aircraft that it is already paid for because of its acquisition of the S-400 system, and to impose sanctions as a consequence of that choice. However, believe that because the United States is a member of NATO, and because the American people are only as secure as the alliance is strong, it is in our interests for NATO allies to have advanced military capabilities, and NATO is moving towards the F-35 as a core capability, and interoperability across the alliance is extremely important. And if Turkey were to undo that mistake in a verifiable, irreversible way, to move forward, to move Turkey under the right circumstances with the right provisions and security for that decision, is something that would be in the American national interests, and is something that should be advanced with all due caution, with a period of time to ensure that it is in American interests going forward.
Dr. Borschevskaya?
Yes, and I would add to that, when we sanctioned Turkey for the purchase of S-400, we did, when we removed Turkey as a co-producer of F-35, we did say that if Turkey were to relinquish the S-400, Turkey would be brought back into this program. And I agree with Celeste's comments to that end. Not only is this issue important because of NATO cohesion, because Turkey is a NATO ally, but the question is, what leverage do we have with Turkey to relinquish the S-400, if not bring it back into the program, again, with an appropriate cooling off period?
Thank you. Well, this is a complex topic, and I think we all recognize that. Turkey has one foot in Europe, one foot in the Middle East, and they try to focus on both, and I don't think they can. So for the purview, for the portfolio of this committee, I think the NATO military alliance is all important as we address Turkey. And I think that Turkey needs to return to its traditional, historic role as anchoring that southeast corner of the NATO treaty alliance, because this is a treaty. It is a treaty that carries dramatic consequences if Article 5 is invoked. So this is an extremely important topic to me as chairman, and I know to this committee because I've heard all of these comments, and I appreciate it. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you so much.